Hello everyone, this is part 3 of population ecology, and now we still continue to look at curves, and we want to look at some of these population growth curves and get an idea of what shape they have. So in this example here, this is a gray seal population in Alaska, and they track the population over time. And notice here they had incomplete tagging at first. Get my pen. They had incomplete tagging just because in the 70s we weren't as good at tagging animals. And complete tagging came mid-70s to 90s, and then after that we had really good photography with drones that you could actually photograph. So it's different ways that they measured it, but still they were able to get these populations of this animal that's definitely on the rise. So I'm going to go back to this previous slide and notice that I'm telling you that it repeatedly doubled the population. So if the population were to double, it comes to 5,000 and then it doubles again to 10, and it keeps doubling and it keeps doing that. It's a population that's not hurting. It's a population that's doing very well. The size is increasing. So we're going to call that exponential growth. That exponential growth is this kind of curve that shoots up, and they're sort of J-shaped. They sort of have the shape of a J, so they're also called J-shaped curves. And that's an example of exponential growth in this particular organism over a particular period of time. Rotifers are these little organisms that live in stagnant water and polluted water. I know that at the water treatment plant, they have many of these inside the sludge, and they actually break down a matter. And so it's something really great to have inside in these tanks of the water treatment plant. And there is endless food for these rotifers. So they reproduce and they eat all the leftover organic matter that's in that sludgy stuff. And they're single-celled, small organism, but look what they can do. They can go from just being a few of them in the tanks, and they don't have to seed those tanks. They just do it on it by itself. And it will just, if you started this experiment and put in 100 in this container that has enough food for them, after 5 days, 60 individuals. Let's see, population at start. I'm sorry, I got this crooked. 60 individuals. You have 60 individuals per day. Okay, after 5 days. And then after 15 days, you have 437 individuals per day that are rising here. So, you have this curve. This is J-shaped curve. Okay, so that's an exponential curve. It's the same slide. So growth rate here was showing 60, 437, and 1,181. I want to keep these slides in so that when you go back to them, you can refer to them and have all the information. So the question is, if there's enough food, this is going to continue to grow. But really, will it take off in an enclosure forever and ever and ever and ever and never stop? It can't do that, because at some point it's going to run out of food, right? And then what's it going to do? So once it runs out of food, it's going to level out. That leveling out is what we call the carrying capacity for that population. So it's going to have to level off, because there's no habitat that has food that's available always without running out. Okay, so now the J is really in this part, but once it levels out, it's no longer a J curve, it's sort of an S-shaped curve, because it reached its carrying capacity, and then it'll stay stable at that population and not continue to reproduce. I mean, they reproduce, but there's a lot of deaths also. So that's the S-shaped curve, or also called logistic growth. Okay, so exponential, 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 and if we were to measure it only to there, we would have thought that was exponential, but once it levels out, it's going to be a logistic growth once it reaches its carrying capacity. This is written out for you because you have the notes and you can review back. So a logistic growth rate assumes that the rate of the population growth slows as the population size approaches the carrying capacity, leveling out. And as a definition, the carrying capacity is the maximum sustainable population a particular environment can support over a long period of time. Good. So how well does this logistic model, the one that irons out and reaches its carrying capacity, how well does it fit the growth of real populations? So they did some studies and looked at the growth of these laboratory populations of some animals, and they saw that indeed these single-celled organisms would do that. They give enough food in the beginning and they took off, and then eventually they would level out. This is paramecium, and this is Daphnia, another cool little single-celled organism. And it'll, these are all the data points, and they sort of stay in that location. So sometimes it's a seasonal increase, sometimes it's not, and it depends on the population. Now, sometimes you look at two populations here, and they don't seem to fit the model at all. It's not like during a certain season, they grow, reproduce, you have many, many, and then they iron out. And this is an example of the colored lemming and stoats, not organisms that we see in our backyards. And that in green is the lemming. And so look at it, this population of the lemming gets really high, and then it crashes. And then it gets high, and it crashes, high, and crashes. So the stoat population is this one. It is rising, rising, rising. And what's it doing? This one here is the predator. So if the stoat is the predator, it's feeding on these lemmings. And it feeds on them, feeds on them, feeds on them, and it starts to do really well, and the population of lemmings is going to crash. And along with it, because there's not enough food, the stoats crash. Then the lemmings recover, and they do pretty well, and the stoats go after them and eat them, eat them, eat them, and the population crashes. So that's an example of how not all populations just have free reign of an environment. If there's a predator involved, it's not going to always fit those models like they do in a lab. I'm going to cut this here because next we're going to talk about humans. Look at this wonderful beach and how populations of humans have increased over time. Okay, thanks for listening.